Thank you so much, Feminist of Global South. I truly appreciate this opportunity. And I stepped in, I actually had almost all the input that was presented by the previous speaker. But I just want to make several points in the 8 minutes that I've been allocated, where we actually really need to start paying attention to. I think firstly, we must really reflect on the type of global multilateral crisis that we're confronted right now. And the fact that we're seeing, in fact, actions of delegitimization of multilateral institutions. I mean, the second issue I want to make is that we need to pay attention to the fact that the delegitimization will not benefit Global South, but also it will worsen our position. So that's something that we need to pay attention to. And I want to link that with the point of the fact that, in fact, from the word go, the whole idea of multilateralism is about collaboration and integration of nations and finding common ground with each other and where there are areas of contestation. So therefore, if the institutions unto which are meant to hold these collaborations, integrations, and conversation and finding common grounds are undermined, what will happen to the Global South and specifically women? And I think for me, we just need to think about imagining a world where we have no multilateral institutions that actually exist. The other 3 points that I think that we must not stop, and I think the previous speaker really sits on it very well around the international financial architecture and how also these multilateral institutions have kind of like really entrenched the hierarchies that are embedded, in particular Africa, where Africa has really been seen as a junior partner in the multilateralism space, and obviously across the Global South. So what should be the feminist thinking around that? Is that firstly is that patriarchy tends to turn a blind eye towards women's issues, and they view the expertise and the strength of women as inadequate to participate in that space. I think that's the first issue. I think ignorance tends to take over and overshadow the perceptions of women who are occupying leadership spaces. But also, we also know that how the gender dividend has also been used as well to undermine the very struggle of feminists, where women were not ready to take on leadership positions, are put up into senior positions of power at a global level so that they can make mistakes, and so that they would then, patriarch will then come back and say, look at the mistakes that these people are actually making, women are making. I think the issue around Global South, and especially their vulnerability around unequal gendered impacts of climate change. I think we're facing COP17, and I think as feminists, we must take an intersectional outlook on all these global events. I mean, we just come out of the G20 meeting now. I mean, a draft. We already know what are the areas of contestation, and climate change is already coming out as one of the areas that is going to be a massive area of contestation, because President Trump had called it a con job during the UNGA. So we need to pay attention to that. I think several demands that we must really make is, firstly, is the promotion of the principles of feminist foreign policy that are very intersectional by nature, promoting human rights, but also two, ensuring that financial and other resources are allocated in advance for gender equity. And I know we say equality, but for gender equity, which then begins to understand the discourse unto which and the differences unto which several women are coming from. The third one is around increasing the representation of women in decision-making. And I think the emphasis I'm making around equity versus equality is to really create spaces for women to be exposed in complex debates a lot more earlier in their lives. I don't want to say training, leadership training, because I think women are overtrained. We're just one group that is overtrained comparing to anyone else. So I do think that it's an exposure it's an exposure, it's appetite for risk, allowing women to make mistakes when they're in leadership positions, because they are often quite punitive measures that are actually imposed on women when they make mistakes. But I think also part of that as well, identify resourcing and supporting women when they are being exposed. I mean, for instance, just as a simple example, you think about the shrinking funding for women to participate in global conversation, even before they are in leadership position. There's just no funding for them to travel to in an African context, in an AU or regional meetings, etc. And that exposure is actually important, because then you're building a second layer, a leadership. I think the other point that I want to really make as part of something that we need to pay attention to is around ensuring that we're able to collaborate and build structures that reflect on the discourse of where we are. Amongst those, today's conversation must really be about what has been the outcome of IMF and World Bank, and whether does it really address the issues that we're about. What has been the outcome of UNGA? Whether does it really addresses the issue that we're about. I think the other one is around really regional security issues. We need to pay attention to that, and as well as fundamentally also talk about issues of economic inclusion, because there's a direct link between multilateralism and economic exclusion of women, and strengthen institutions that are already pursuing the inclusion at a national level, at a regional level, but also at the same time really advocate for a political system at a national level and at a regional level. Political system that supports women's participation in mainstream politics. Because as long as also women are in the periphery of politics, we're not going to be able to see a change within a multilateralism thinking. We're always going to end up with technocrats who have studied international relations, who are pursuing a particular agenda, but also who are not grounded in political nuanced and a clear political agenda that seeks to advance gender equity. Thank you very much.